Hello, everyone. My name is Martin Gerald, the Vice President for International Program Development with GVF, and I would like to welcome you all today to this GVF Satellite Evolution Group webinar for SatelliteAsia. Our theme today is Bridging the Divide, enabling affordable business and community digital connectivity. And for the next hour or so, we will be joined by 4 distinguished panelists, experts in this field of bridging the digital divide, and I will introduce them shortly. Just as a little preamble before we kick off into our discussion. Now, the digital divide is the product of many factors, but 2 are of great significance: connectivity and affordability. Once characterized as primarily a developing world issue for low and middle income countries, the COVID-19 pandemic has underlined the degree to which access to affordable broadband is also a need felt by people in a wide range of other countries. Satellite has long been correctly seen as a means of solving the connectivity problem, as it can be deployed anywhere and its coverage is ubiquitous. The emergence of high throughput satellite technology has already changed the capabilities of the satellite industry, transforming the economics of satellite-based connectivity and thereby addressing the affordability problem. Further radical change has come with the expansion of more powerful HTS coverage across the globe, together with increased capabilities in existing MEO satellite systems and with the new wave of LEO mega constellations. Orbiting infrastructure, of course, is only part of the solution. Consider the ground segment, the satellite terminal, or the customer premises equipment, and its affordability for both consumer-orientated solutions and business-focused solutions. By the very definition of discussing the digital divide, satellite will continue to serve wherever broadband networks are needed to change the underserved into the well-served. And with that, I would like to introduce members of the panel today. We're very pleased to have with us Christian Pattereau, CEO of Pacific; Dorit Oren, Senior Director for Solutions Marketing and Corporate Communications with Gilat Satellite Networks; Imran Malik, Senior Vice President Global Sales Fixed Data for SES Networks; and Nick Leek, Head of Satellite and Space Systems with Optus. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our webinar. If before kicking off into our series of questions, I would like to ask you, if I may, for each of you to introduce yourselves in a little more detail, with particular reference to the position of your organization and you professionally, with reference to the world of the digital divide and overcoming issues relating to successfully bridging that divide. So if I could start with Christian Pattereau with Pacific. Christian, the next couple of minutes are over to you.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you to GVF for inviting me to this session. So I'm Christian. I'm the CEO and founder of Pacific Broadband Satellite. We are a satellite operator in Asia, based in Singapore. We operate Pacific One satellite. It's a high throughput broadband satellite that was designed specifically to connect remote and rural users, primarily small or medium enterprise users in remote areas, including schools, hospitals, as well as residential users. We cover with this satellite 25 countries, a large part of Southeast Asia, as well as most of the Pacific Islands. And at the moment, we've rolled out quite a few sites already. We've been in operation for over a year, and we are very close to governments, of course, regulators, to roll out and to bridge the digital divide. We're looking already at a second satellite on the wake of the success of the first one.
Okay, thank you. Dorit Oren with Gilat.
I'm Dorit Oren, Senior Director of Solution Marketing at Gilat Satellite Networks, and I'm very pleased to be here today to discuss this very exciting topic. In a few words, Gilat is a global company with over 30 years of experience and expertise in delivering the ground segment for satellite-based connectivity. Our platform has a major advantage in supporting multiple applications, such as broadband, cellular backhaul, various enterprise and government applications, mobility applications such as in-flight connectivity and maritime, as well as defense applications. However, for this webinar, I would like to focus on our solutions for broadband and cellular backhaul, and to convey what Gilat is doing to support bridging the digital divide. I want to share how we are involved in worldwide projects in which we are delivering affordable connectivity to rural communities.
Okay.
On a personal note, I'd just like to point out that these projects are the most rewarding as they dramatically change both the personal and business lives of millions of people worldwide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Imran.
So thank you, Martin, and thanks to GBF for giving me an opportunity to share my views. So I'm responsible for the fixed data segment at SES, which produces about more than 30% of the company's revenue. Based out of Singapore, I'm a senior vice president at SES Networks. SES is the only satellite operator which has satellites in the geostationary orbit, the wide beam, as well as HTS satellites. And also we've been successfully operating a MEO constellation for the last 6 to 7 years as well. I like this statement, Martin, that you made, change the underserved to well-served. We've been very active in this. So on our MEO fleet, we have provided a capacity to a lot of countries in the Pacific, whereby we have just pretty much brought them into the information age to the point that they have developed the ecosystem to be able to now go over, have enough traffic to go over to undersea cables. And we've been very active on our HTS satellite, especially in Asia, with rural broadband projects in Indonesia, Malaysia, and a few other countries. And since I look after other parts of the world as well, I can echo what Dorit said. We are using Gilat equipment in a couple of places in LATAM for similar projects. And these projects, I agree with Dorit, are the most rewarding. I mean, you really bring change to people's lives.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Nick with Optus.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, GVS, for inviting me on your panel, and hello to all our other panelists. My name's Nick Lee. I'm the head of our Optus Satellite and Space Division. So I look after all our sales and marketing, engineering, and operations. We've been around for over 30 years. You know, we are a regional operator. So we are serving primarily Australia and New Zealand. In bridging the digital divide, we do that daily from a TV broadcasting perspective. We run a service for free-to-air, so our national broadcasters and our commercial broadcasters basically use our satellite service to deliver free-to-air TV signals all over Australia, and we do the same in New Zealand. So I would say that the service we provide might be in some ways better than you get off a transmitter in a city. I don't know whether I should say that, but I did. So from a broadcasting perspective, I think, fantastic. I think, we're carrying over 100 channels of HD, SD, and radio channels. And, some of the radio channels are the most listened to channels, across the country. So I think from a broadcast perspective, I think we do a very good job of ensuring that people can get the news, they can see their movies, and they can watch sport. So I think that's a big tick in the box.
All
From
right.
a broadband perspective, it's slightly different. We in 2000 basically lobbied the government to help subsidize satellite broadband terminals, and we actually worked with Gilat in delivering a service to Australia outside of the major capital cities. If anybody knows Australia, it's a very, very big country. Everybody lives on the eastern seaboard, but there's still a lot of people that are underserved in terms of broadband. We then supported the NBN with a first release satellite service. So we put on about 48,000 customers with a 6.1 service. And then NBN launched their 2 SkyMuster satellites. So NBN really service the consumer. That is from a fiber, wireless, and from a satellite perspective, and they have just over 100,000 customers. I think those 100,000 customers would prefer to be on a fiber connection, as we all would. And you can certainly kind of gauge that when you're in these types of meetings, that if somebody potentially is on a satellite connection, that the uplink is probably harder in delivering the video back to the rest of the team. So there's still a kind of way to go in terms of the service, but the price is kind of compatible. So the affordability is kind of compatible.
Yeah, you've actually just segued there directly into my first question, actually, and I'll turn to you on that particular issue in a little while. But first of all, putting this particular point to Christian first. Now, Nick has just alluded to connectivity and affordability, as did I in our opening preamble. But to begin with, taking a high-level view, is the biggest barrier to serving the underserved, is it connectivity or is it affordability? Christian, over to you.
Right. Well, I'd go certainly for the latter, for affordability. The connectivity is a mean to an end. It's what system you put into place in order to answer a particular market. But first thing first is the willingness to pay of that market. And then you have to find the right technology, the right systems to deliver that connectivity. So yes, it is true, the populations that suffer from the digital divide typically live in remote areas, difficult terrain, difficult environments. But those are logistical issues. This has to do with the way you design your system. For ourselves, we design a system with transportable small VSATs that can be deployed in all these remote locations. So we really put the accent on the access, the level of bandwidth that we would give, but none of that would be possible if the first element wasn't there, which is affordability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. And coming back to you now, Nick, on this point, you started to reference connectivity and affordability. So with this high-level view, which is the greater barrier?
I think Australians will pay a price to get connectivity. In the day that we're now in a environment of social media, we're a first world country. Everybody wants to be online, so therefore people will pay. What I'm saying is what NBN has brought to Australian market is affordability across each of the technologies, and as a level of subsidy, so that you're not paying kind of that barrier to entry, which is the hardware and installation cost. So that's a big tick on the NBN side. But there's still the performance. So you still need to be able to do your video conferencing. You still need to be able to do your web browsing. People still will use a VSAT connection to do their voice services, so their VoIP. So I think with the soon to be delivered software-defined high throughput satellites, which is what Optus has ordered from Airbus. We've ordered a OneSat, which will basically double or triple the amount of capacity that you'll get on a traditional NBN satellite. You can therefore then not only address affordability, but you can also increase the amount of throughput that you can provide to customers. Now, Optus is focused on corporate and government, and we certainly will be able to increase the capacity that will be available at very affordable pricing based on the new technology that we're now seeing at the GEO and with Imran at the MEO level.
Okay, thank you. And Dorit, your perspective on the relative significance of connectivity and affordability from Gilat's point of view.
Well, from our point of view, really both are barriers. I agree with my colleagues that just spoke. Of course, the issue of affordability is key, but also we have to remember that there's about half of the world that's not connected because of real barriers that you can't connect. And that's where, the SATCOM comes in to make it feasible. And then, of course, there's the issue of cost, though. So, as we said, cost, or, as well known, the cost is coming down with the abundance of capacity stemming from, the increased launches of HTS and very high throughput satellites and the promise of NGSO constellations. But still, it's not enough to just be connected. And I want to point out that you need to provide the internet connectivity at the level that supports the data-intensive applications. In other words, the speeds and the reliability are key for a successful solution. And of course, that's what Gilat makes sure to provide, and in a cost-effective way. And now Gilat, I want to explain, has a very large variety of VSATs to address the various application needs, like I mentioned earlier. So for example, there's like the Gemini family and Scorpio family of VSATs for the consumer market. However, there's a much stronger VSAT family called Capricorn for the enterprise and cellular backhaul markets. And I want to add, though, that since Gilat sells to satellite operators and service providers, we make sure that our solutions are cost effective. And I want to explain just in a few words what I mean. We're not selling directly to the end user, but we want to make sure that the platform provides the high bandwidth efficiency that maximizes throughput. And the second point is that we have a unique embedded acceleration technology that improves the link's performance and utilization. And the third point is the quality of service capabilities that allow smarter bandwidth management and prioritization according to actual needs. Now, these 3 points are just an example of advantages of cost reduction that bring to the table the advantage that can be leveraged to benefit the end user, particularly in the developing world.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Now, turning to the space segment, Imran, I'd like to put to you the following question. It's a sort of very, very simple question in a way, but with a quite complex answer, I think. So why essentially are communication satellites so well equipped to provide communication services to those on the wrong side of the digital divide? What's your perspective from the point of view of a major global satellite operator?
No, thanks, Martin. So before I answer this question, I just wanted to share with you some numbers just to put this problem in perspective, the magnitude of this problem in perspective, I should say. So according to this recent ITU numbers, only 46% of the world's population is unconnected, which is a very big number in this day and age. It's like about 3.6 billion people who are still not benefiting from the information age. So, and I believe, and I think this is an undeniable fact that of all the transmission medium, satellites have the largest amount of reach. It's not just only limited to the wide beam satellite, but pretty much any satellite of its kind, has the ability to reach many customers at the same time. So satellites can easily bridge the digital divide, and it's been proven time and time again. Christian and I are beneficiaries in Indonesia, for instance, because they're running a very, very large and successful program to bridge the digital divide. So the main issue is that you have to provide services into places where operators do not want to go. And there is a requirement and a desire by the governments like the government of Indonesia or Malaysia and many other governments to be able to provide the same level of resources and same level of facilities to the populations over there. Christian mentioned schools, their hospitals, rural health centers, etc. So it's not cost effective for the operators to roll out the network to the edge, but satellites make it possible, and they make it possible in a very, very quick time frame. And as Dorit pointed out, that it's not just Gilat, but all of the other hardware providers also have some very, very interesting solutions. So just to conclude, it's the reach, it's the speed of deployment, and now I would say that it's becoming more affordable to do so via satellite.
Okay, and Dorit, given what Imran has said, from your point of view on the ground equipment side, what is it about communication satellites that essentially renders the increasingly accelerating developments on the ground segment side that is actually really, really well attuned to addressing digital divide issues?
Yes, it's not a secret, and we all know that satellite communication can reach everywhere. There's many situations where it's just not feasible to put in fiber, jungles, deserts, mountains, large water bodies. And of course, the issue then comes to be like, who can afford it? And I mentioned before a few of the advantages to put into the ground segment to make it more possible from a financial point of view. But what I want to kind of stress now is the fact that SATCOM, this is really tying into your words at the beginning. This pandemic really showed us that without connectivity, we're really, really in trouble. And particularly in the places that don't have any connectivity at all, during the time of the pandemic, we're seeing the SATCOM brought a very quick solution to save people and to enable life in this very uncomfortable situation. And some examples include schools and universities that, of course, function with remote learning, required video conferencing, and that required the connection from home as well as from the university or the school. And in the health area, for example, the pandemic we saw temporary centers for caring for the sick, such as field hospitals and temporary hostels to keep the contagious people away from others. Yes. So these centers had to be connected for both the health reasons and the welfare of the individuals. So really, to conclude this point, Gilat is seeing that the high interest in satellite-based solutions for both ensuring and expanding essential connectivity is for the business, the education, the health, and the personal use. So we're definitely working very hard with our partners, some of them here now on the panel, to make sure that we provide the most state-of-the-art solutions to answer this very, very important need.
Yeah, thanks. And Christian, your space segment is bringing solutions to a vast geography and a very, very varied geography. So would you like to comment on why satellites are so desperately important?
Yeah, absolutely. One element that we have to remember in terrestrial communication is the distribution network and how much it costs, especially to reach lowly populated areas. The satellite has a built-in reach, an obvious built-in reach that bypasses all that. So satellite has a right to win in certain areas. It has that built-in capabilities that terrestrial systems don't have. And I believe that right to win will continue prevailing in those areas for as long as we have sufficient supply. The issue of our industry, especially in the broadband side, perhaps not so much in the broadcast world in some part of the world, but in the broadband segment, there is a blatant undersupply. The demand is just exploding in broadband. And if the satellite industry does not provide a sufficient amount of supply, those less effective, more expensive distribution network, terrestrial distribution network will take over. And the moment they are there, we will lose our right to win forever. So I think it's very important that we continue supplying, and also to realize that there is no uniform cost of bandwidth across a country. Like if you look at Indonesia, yes, downtown Jakarta, you may pay a megabit, I don't know, a dedicated megabit at $10. But the moment you go to a remote areas, if you want to access that same megabit on the terrestrial network, it'll be at $1,000 or $2,000 after it has transited through, microwave cables, etc. So that's where satellite has its strength, really.
Yeah, the same question to you, Nick, but I'd like to sort of introduce the next following question, and if you could sort of tackle that at the same time. With reference to the importance of satellites in resolving issues related to the digital divide, what are the unique requirements of businesses on the wrong side of the divide as compared to the requirements of individuals?
Yeah, I think to follow on from the other three panelists, I think the devices and end user behavior is going to drive a different approach. Certainly what we see with the younger generation, they're not going to sit down in front of the computer. So therefore, they're not going to want a broadband connection as we, more mature people, are used to using. And it's all about mobility. So to Dorit's products, the mobile backhaul products are really, really important. And what we've developed in Australia is a small cell product that we service remote and rural Australia communities because they want to use a mobile handset rather than buy an expensive computer. So I think you'll see that flow through the rest of the country. If you look at the mobile plans in India or Indonesia or Philippines, there's very little for topping up their mobile phone plans. So therefore, remote regions are going to be serviced more by mobile backhaul and wireless type networks, and people are going to use those networks through their mobile phones. Now, in terms of businesses, I mean, that is in Australia, it is the communications are really important. Australia is famous for its mining and oil and gas industries. And we're seeing a big uptake now coming out of COVID of getting more and more communications into those particular sites. And because of the automation, a lot of that is, again, using satellite as a backhaul and hanging off private LTE and other types of capability that sees kind of local IoT, local automation and control of those actual mining sites. So again, it is more expensive than building a fiber optic cable in there, but the satellite gives it an element of reliability. If you stop digging coal or stop mining iron ore, for a couple of hours, it can cost you millions and millions of dollars. So satellite does have a very, very key role in the Australian business industry for ensuring comms, not only for doing business, but again, we would stick a 4G site there so that they've got the voice comms. We'd stick a dish there so they get their TV, whether it's a pay TV or free-to-air TV. And obviously people will want to get on the internet to keep in touch with their families. So you've got a business objective, but you've got to kind of look after the worker in terms of their home-life balance type of scenario.
Indeed, yeah. And Dorit, if you could briefly comment on that as well, businesses and the individual.
Sure. Of course, there's different requirements depending on the application, and we serve both of these markets. VSATs that are focused on the enterprise and government applications, they require usually higher throughput and additional robustness and end-to-end security features, as well as layer 2 connectivity. Large businesses also require Gilat's network management and diversity schemes for backup and redundancy. And actually, a prime example is our customer in Australia, NBN, mentioned earlier in this webinar. NBN is not only now a consumer network, but it actually rolled out the largest business network to provide a comprehensive solution to support NBN's vision of extending the business-grade services to rural parts of Australia. The purpose of this huge network that is powered by Gilat addresses the high bandwidth internet connectivity needs of businesses everywhere in Australia. As mentioned, not everybody lives on the coast, and many people that are kind of dispersed throughout the continent of Australia don't have connectivity if it's not by satellite communication. And we see this huge network that has 9 operational gateways, and the 10th one that is for a disaster recovery provides a fantastic solution for the population in Australia, and also has a diversity solution as like backup that is provided by our platform with diversity for also the gateway, also the data center, and also the network management.
Yeah,
On another note, though, just for consumers, I want to give a quick example. This is very different here. Here they're looking for a low-cost modem, a self-install capability. And here I just want to give a quick example with our partner Eutelsat in Russia, that we have a network there over Ka band satellite of Eutelsat, with the largest DTH satellite TV provider in Russia called Tricolor. And the subscribers there in these rural areas are thrilled to set up in about an hour a self-installed VSAT for internet access at terrestrial speeds. So we have also solutions for the consumers, and their, of course, their needs are very different.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Now, Imran, we've been speaking very recently about the requirement of the consumer and of business. Now, turning to you as one of the top global operators, it is often alleged, it is often complained that satellite communications is too costly. Is that a valid complaint still, in your opinion, from the business side, the consumer side? What's your perspective on this?
Right. So before I address this, I just wanted to share some insights on the enterprise requirements as well. So for the enterprise requirements, the key is more reliability. And one point that's often ignored to the peril of the networks is that the technology that's deployed should be able to process the traffic. So packet per second is very, very important.
Yes.
The reliability and the service uptime can be addressed by choosing different antenna sizes. So for instance, in Indonesia, where we have deployed a rural network for Bhakti on SES-12, we use different antenna sizes, so 1.8 meter or higher for cellular backhaul, and 1.2 meter for normal community Wi-Fi access. The other thing that I wanted to point out was for the enterprise, especially in the natural resource sector, we have found a niche for our O3B constellation by providing large throughput at low latency. And in the pandemic, we have seen an increase in volume because the employees cannot travel back to the host countries. So employee welfare has also been addressed. So now going back to the question that you asked me about the cost. So in my opinion, this is a legacy impression, and I think most of the pretty much all of the panelists would agree. Yes, satellite communications used to be very expensive, and I think I'm going to be showing my age by giving you this example. The first transponder lease agreement that I signed back in 1997 was with an Asian operator, and the cost per megahertz was $9,000 per megahertz. And every year the price would increase by 5%. and the operator justified this by, our cost of capital is very high. I mean, in this day and age, no one pays this this price. And I deployed a VSAT network on this network, which could only support 512 outbound, 128 kilobits per second inbound, and the cost of the IDU was $12,300. Okay, I mean, without naming the equipment manufacturer, but now. I mean, because of the advancements in technology, the efficiencies have increased. We are able to cram more and more bits per hertz, and so the megahertz used is now lower, and the cost of the hardware has also decreased. I think, I'm sure Dorit must be laughing when I mentioned 512 outbound and 128K inbound. So it's just because of the advancement of technologies that the connectivity through satellite has become more and more affordable. There can be an argument made that it can still improve. 100%, it can still improve, but it's not going to be improved by factors of tens of. But it's definitely going to improve. More throughput. Will bring in the cost per bit down.
Thank you. I'm going to change tack a little bit now and bringing in Christian here, given that within your coverage you have many small developing nations as well, of course, as all or part of some very larger developing nations. But within that broad context, in terms of helping to bridge the divide, are universal service funds important?
Well, the answer is very simple. Yes, it is extremely important, because, first of all, these programs, when they exist, of course, and they don't exist everywhere, especially on the small island nations, they are, at infancy stage of their universal access funds, and some of them start from a good idea, but they face a lot of trouble in being put into practice. But like Imran mentioned, of course, Indonesia is on a completely different scale of organization and foresight in deploying that, and the Philippines is pretty close to Indonesia in their rollout as well. But yes, so absolutely bridging the digital divide through universal access funds, I think is a very good idea. It's extremely helpful, because otherwise it will be left to each individual village in each individual community to have to pay for that, and then to have to scratch their head on how to share that infrastructure. Even a VSAT that today costs, say, $500 can still be too expensive for one single village to buy alone. So they would have, central organization is important, so that, maybe the village would pay somehow, but it's centralized. It becomes a lot, the decision making and the rollout of these programs is a lot more coherent and I would say intelligent than leaving it to each village and user to do it. The ramp up also is a lot slower if you leave it to each individual regions or district to make their decisions. Now in the Philippines, for instance, they do have the funds, and they do incentivize the districts or the regions to do it, but they provide the funds to the regions and then leave, to a certain extent, the regions to make their own decisions. But of course, accompanying those regions to make that decision and make it happen. So that's another interesting angle. So there's different ways of doing this, but in the end, like I said, when we opened up, to me, the most important is the funding, because whatever the other panelists said just now, that yes, it is generally affordable. You're still talking about a digital divide that hits mostly people that are the less affluent of all, right? So those people that the 46% of the population, of the world population, that doesn't have internet or connectivity. I understand that in Australia you do have quite a few people who are still lagging behind, but to me, they don't constitute the bulk of those unconnected people. The unconnected are usually the less affluent countries. And then in that, just to say a few words on the difference between individuals and enterprise, to me, when we talk about the digital divide, the enterprise play an extremely important role in rolling out this digital divide. The enterprise, are the fuel of those little communities. And beyond the governments, they also provide a lot of opportunity to connect. So I think connecting SMEs is actually very, very important to bridge the digital divide in those developing countries. And that is very often forgotten. When you talk about digital divide, you always talk about the poor villager, the people living off subsistence, but there are some SMEs in those villages and those remote regions. And generally, those SMEs have better willingness to pay than the individual, than the residential users. But in terms of needs, in terms of applications, it's very, very similar to what a residential user would need.
Okay, thanks. Nick, turning to you on this point on universal service funds. Now, bearing in mind what Christian has just said, how does this situation transpose to the Australian context? And perhaps building into that, if you'd like to comment on what else over and above universal service funds we could expect in terms of, sort of government policy and regulatory implementation, whose job it is to bridge the divide in their country. Is there other stuff that governments could be doing beyond these funds?
Yeah, I think the Australian government's been very good in terms of helping to bridge the digital divide. Early 2000s, they basically provided subsidies to RSPs to cover the cost of the installation in hardware. So really, it was just the cost of the bandwidth and the cost of the service. NBN came along. Obviously, NBN heavily subsidised in terms of the 2 satellites they built, and again subsidising hardware, which is very good. The government's now looking at alternative voice capability, because aging copper, aging systems in remote and rural Australia, where there was a universal service obligation to provide voice to everybody from an emergency services perspective. And we've been successful in a trial where we've used a femto cell with a 1 kilometre radius, so you can get 4G VoLTE calls, and then just a simple VSAT and a Wi-Fi, so that you can do a voice over IP call. So government will be looking at how they can basically roll these types of services out. And then the other key thing is I talked about mobile backhaul. The Australian government have a program called Mobile Black Spots, where people like Optus, as a mobile operator, basically co-fund the build out of the mobile network. And then when you get to really remote areas like Aboriginal communities or eco lodges or other types of small communities where it would not be economical to build a normal mobile tower, Optus would deploy a mobile backhaul using a small cell technology, which is not building a big tower. It'll give you 12 kilometre radius for your 4G connectivity. It'll give you a reasonable internet access, so you can do your social media and do your internet. So, the government if our communication minister went to a remote town, they're not going to get bashed over the head by, like I said earlier, a fixed broadband connection on a computer. They get bashed up about not having the mobile phone coverage. So the government has taken the initiative to try and expand mobile coverage through co-funding the capital build of these small cell sites.
Thanks. Imran, your comments on universal service funds and what additional things governments and regulators should be doing?
I think without the universal service funds, it would perhaps not be possible to bridge the digital divide because some funding is needed to go where the commercial operators won't go, and it's not. Access to internet is not a luxury anymore. I mean, it's an absolute necessity. And if we have to pull up these masses and contribute to the development of these nations, these funds play a very important role in building up these networks. Now, the regulators, in my opinion, can play a very important role because if you look at where these networks have been deployed successfully, that's where the regulators have stepped in and they have facilitated the rollout. And I would say facilitated the rollout without compromising on their core requirements, etc. And how have they facilitated the rollout? They have facilitated it by providing access to spectrum, which some regulators in certain countries block, by providing a level playing field for domestic and foreign satellite operators, because they recognize that there's a need, a national urgency for these kind of networks to be deployed. And time is of the essence. So they've made it possible. Indonesia comes to mind, and Christian mentioned Philippines, it comes to mind as well. I mean, in both these cases, the foreign satellite operators like SES and the other operators have been providing equal access. The end result is the networks have been deployed very quickly, and the need is served. Whereas there's certain countries, without naming them, where the access is blocked by the regulator, and over there is a definite, genuine need for these networks, but they're being not deployed. Things have slowed down because the domestic operators don't have the capacity to do this, and the foreign operators are not really allowed to come in at all.
Okay, thanks. Doreen, I've got a question for you that harks back to an early part of the conversation. Now, from Gilat's point of view as ground segment equipment provision, and with reference to comments made and the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic, what's the nature of the role of satellites to provide solutions to businesses and communities on the wrong side of the divide, but located in urban settings? So often, of course, the emphasis or the thought about digital divide is about remoteness, and it's about non-urban environments in developing lower income countries. But what about high income countries in the urban environment that has been particularly underlined by COVID? So what's the role of satellite in the urban sphere?
Okay, yes, thank you. Yes, it is of course true, as you say, that the claim to fame of satellite communication is to provide the connectivity to rural areas where terrestrial connectivity is not an option. However, there are several scenarios in urban settings that benefit dramatically from satellite communication. And we see quite a few of those, and I want to give a few examples. We see more and more urban centers who back up their terrestrial infrastructure with satellite communication to protect for any kind of failure. In other words, it can be from, God forbid, a bomb, a terrorist attack, or it can be from all kinds of floods and earthquakes and hurricanes, because business continuity is a key requirement in today's digital age. So having a network go down is just not an option. So all of a sudden we're seeing satellite communication in urban centers. Another example is SATCOM that is used in urban centers for large events. Here, temporarily additional capacity is brought in for large concerts or sports events. And that is required in order to serve the additional connectivity required in that kind of a situation. But maybe most important is a scenario of emergency response, and that also touches on what happened with the COVID, but a lot broader than that, because it's really a critical issue when there's, as I said, like natural disasters. And I want to explain that when communication breaks down due to a natural disaster, of all kinds that we know, we have the solution of on the move satellite connectivity that can be rapidly brought in to both assist the emergency response forces, whether it's the fire or health or police, as well as connecting the people who are in life-threatening situations. And we've had so many examples that are really heartbreaking of people that can be under ruins but managed to connect because of the cell that was brought in. And that's how they were found under terrible situations of earthquakes. These situations are often addressed with vehicles that are called COW, that sail on wheels, that are rolled in. They consist of a BTS and a VSAT that can be popped up and then quickly deployed when the terrestrial infrastructure totally collapsed. So I want to stress with this question the point that satellite communication in urban regions is a very important development of satellite communication. It used to be that it was only to reach rural areas, and I don't want to say that lightly. That's extremely important, yes, for bridging the digital divide, but it's also an essential backup of terrestrial communication in urban centers.
Yeah, surely. Right, I will look a little bit beyond the pandemic and sort of looking ahead over the next 5 years or so. And turning to you, Imran, what sort of developments in terms of service, products and costs do you anticipate from our industry to bridge the divide? Looking ahead 5 years.
So I think these are very, very exciting times. The speed of evolution is remarkable. And I just wanted to share 2 data points. So between 2009 and 2019, $23 billion went into the space industry, the non-government part of the space industry. And in the last 2 years, in spite of, in fact, the last year, in spite of COVID, a lot of money has been raised for new space-based ventures. So all of this is fueling innovation. And like I said, the future for me is very, very bright. Nick pointed out the software-defined satellites. So that is indeed the future. And you would be surprised the cost per bit that these new satellites can support and the flexibility that they can provide is massive. So we at SES, we are definitely looking at them. Then it's the age of constellation. We are already operating O3b for the last 7 years, a medium Earth orbit constellation. We are bringing in the next generation of O3b, which is mPOWER, which is 10 to 20 times more throughput. And we are also addressing the question on the hardware. In fact, we're partnering with Gilat as one of our vendors for the ground segment piece. And it's not just us. I mean, you're very well aware of the other constellations that are coming up, and it's really an exciting times. And I also wanted to address the use cases. The use cases I mean, more and more use cases are evolving. We are poised to play a very important role in the 5G. But one use case that I just wanted to bring up that Dorit had mentioned as well on the emergency response, it's not just about restoring a site or about restoring a building. With our cell on wheel type of deployment using O3b, we are able to restore a whole city, for instance. In fact, we are now partnering with one of the big 3s in the US to roll out this network, going over to mPOWER, which will then enable them to not just provide a limited amount of services in a whole city, but to really restore it as is. So very exciting times. And one thing that I would very much like to leave with the audience is that if you look at the evolution in satellites, the size of the satellites has increased. They're using more power. The throughput has increased, fine. The hardware on the ground is able to do better and better. However, the antennas are pretty much the same as they used to be a long time back. Yes, there is a reason for it. The physics dictates that it has to be parabolic, but there is a lot of R&D going into the antennas. And I think with the advent of more efficient flat panel antennas, electronically steerable antennas, I think that's what's going to make us really, really mainstream.
I have, we're actually rapidly running out of time. Time does run away very, very quickly on these occasions, unfortunately. But I want to turn to the questions of 4G and 5G. If each of you would actually comment just briefly on the extent to which you think 4G is going to continue to have a role in helping to bridge the divide, and the same with 5G. But is there any substance to the view that certain aspects of 5G deployment might help to widen rather than narrow the divide? Christian.
Yeah, I mean, certainly 5G was designed originally in order to augment the spectrum into dense cities with smaller cells, more efficient communication protocols. So in the end, that means that people in cities will benefit from higher throughput, better connectivity, and this technology is not designed for lowly populated areas. There is enough spectrum there. There's just not enough people to pay for that infrastructure. My view is that there will be a consolidation eventually between 4G and 5G. It will be probably a 5G version for the rural areas. Of course, satellite could support 5G, but the market, the underlying market, is not the market where satellite prevails. So I think 4G still has bright days ahead in order to connect remote areas through a mobile backhaul, but eventually, I'm sure that the two protocols will converge.
Nick.
Yeah, I mean, our small cell product is 4G. That's we're rolling that out into the mobile black spots. We're actually, migrating everything off the 3G network so we can reuse that spectrum in both our 4G and 5G networks. Obviously, Optus are rolling out 5G networks in the capital cities. We're doing trials at the end of the year using mobile backhaul for 5G to give people some level of experience in those remote areas. And obviously, the satellite, and one of the big things about 5G is the hunger for content. So we have a role to play in the traditional broadcast space of distributing content, that we can push content out to the virtual RANs in the network so that people can get a better experience because you're picking your content up through caching rather than going back to the core to actually get that content. So satellite does have a role. I know SES have been very much involved in the ecosystem 5G in Europe, and the same's happening in the US. Whether it, again, you're going to be getting the same experience as you would be if you're a city dweller, I don't think so, but I still think you could give people a better experience than they're currently getting now in a 4G environment.
Thank you. And Dory, Gilat's heavy engagement with the backhaul over satellite with reference, for example, to 4G. Would you like to comment on the continuing importance of 4G and what 5G will actually introduce into the equation?
Sure. This was touched briefly, but I think it's a very important point that bridging the digital divide is happening now more and more with mobile network operators. In other words, they're seeing that satellite backhauling is really allowing them to extend their networks to the rural areas and providing internet connectivity that way via phones. And that was mentioned also earlier in the discussion. In other words, it's much more affordable for people in these communities who often have phones to connect to the internet via these phones rather than via computers that they don't have at home. So this is a key issue, and Gilat is really the leader. I have to tell you that the 4G LTE satellite backhaul deployments are 80% in Gilat's company. In other words, we are the satellite backhaul provider for 80% of such networks worldwide that are connecting over satellite. And we hear tremendous need for that, not only from the MNOs who just want to extend their networks, but really how it solves the digital divide and how these subsidies are often coming. We spoke about the regulators before, and USO often spectrum is given, say for 4G or 5G, in order to provide at least 2G, 3G in some areas. We really see this around the world, not only in the developed countries like in America with T-Mobile or in the UK with EEBT, but we see this in Africa, we see this in Asia, and we see this in South America. And it is a very exciting situation where we've managed to dispel I would call it the concerns or the myths that satellite communication had about it. I think was mentioned earlier that it's a legacy to say that satellite is too expensive. Well, it's not 100% a legacy, but it's definitely come a long way, and it's not as expensive as it used to be, and it's actually quite affordable with business models that compete with the terrestrial connectivity. The complexity of satellite is also being managed with connection over layer 2, and by also Gilat provides the managed service that allows to outsource this complexity. And in addition, there's also the myth of a speed is not sufficient, and we've definitely shown that we provide LTE speeds with the embedded acceleration patented with SoftBank that we have. So there's a lot of real proof in the pudding now that 4G LTE is provided by satellite backhauling in many, many places in the world, and definitely bridging the divide. And we're seeing now as 5G rolls out that into the cities first, this is going to push more and more 4G into the rural areas. And we are very excited about that opportunity. And frankly, that's one of the things that makes me happy to work for a company like Gilat, to see how we're really managing to answer this question of bridging the digital divide.
Yes, and it was in fact Imran that alluded to legacy ideas, right, or legacy high costs, and it's Imran that I'm now going to turn for his comment, for the final comment on this question.
So all you have to do is just look at the networks that are being rolled out for bridging the digital divide. I mean, all of them have 4G as a cornerstone. I mean, you have to provide 4G for all of these networks. I mean, look at Brazil. All of the operators have to support 4G across the country, irrespective of the region. So 4G is definitely going to be there. The most affordable way to extend 4G, in my opinion, right now to the underserved places is through satellite. The 5G at the moment, there's a lot of hype around it, and it will push the rollout of 4G towards the edge of the network much quicker than we anticipated. And eventually we will be playing a role in the 5G as well. Not in all of the use cases, because some of the use cases require latency that we can't match, but in the core use cases for 5G will definitely play a role. And I think one thing that we have not mentioned during our discourse is the fact that we are ideal for cloud-related applications, especially taking the processing out of the edge and bringing it back to the cloud. And just because of our architecture, we can easily support this, and the fact that now we have also low latency and high throughput and very advanced processing on for the waveforms as well as the hardware to be able to support these kind of things. So all in all, good future for us.
Okay, thank you for that very, very optimistic closing remark there. It's great to continue this discussion about the continued efforts of our industry to bridge the digital divide. As you say, Iman, there's still so much more we could discuss, but we have run out of time. So, Dorit Oren, Christian Patero, Nick Leek, Iman Malik, thank you all very much from GVF, from the Satellite Evolution Group, and from the audience of SatelliteAsia. Thank you all for your excellent contributions and to making this a really, really good discussion session.